Today I've got some huge stories for you, and I have some really cool videos coming soon. That's actually why I'm not doing a more normal style video today, but I have some things to discuss. Starting with Intel doing it again. Grab your AMD GPU for massive free performance. AMD has some big plans, and Ryzen 9000 is set to make Intel cry. Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. First up for today, Intel has done it again. And this is not a negative story, it's actually a really positive one. Something that I've honestly been really surprised and impressed with when it comes to Intel's GPUs. If you've been following the channel, and of course, if you aren't, definitely make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon to stay up to date on all the latest PC hardware news. But if you are subscribed, you know that Intel's been releasing new updates left and right, it seems like almost, where they're giving their GPUs just massive performance increases. And of course, don't get me wrong, I hear you. 100% increase when it's only getting 20 FPS to begin with. I get it. I do. But remember that when Intel released their ARC GPUs, they released them with prices for the performance that they could do then. So getting huge performance jump after huge performance jump from new drivers is really nothing but a positive. And today we're getting yet another positive with a new driver update. This time, they actually did something pretty wild. This one actually combines their desktop and notebook drivers, leading to some wild performance gains. Now, I will go and say I'm not really sure why they mentioned this, but you can see here it says Intel's graphics driver package size has temporarily increased because of the inclusion of Intel Core Ultra with Intel Arc Graphics and Intel Graphics Driver. So once again, they're combining these graphics drivers to release them all at once, but they mention temporarily. So maybe they're just trying to get some information on getting better performance when they combine them. Later, they'll end up splitting them off. I'm really not sure. I mean, this is somewhat a negative part of this. I'm not really sure if this is just more proof that Intel's ultimately going to abandon their desktop cards altogether. Obviously, I hope not, especially what we've been hearing about Battle Mage and stuff like that. So fingers crossed there. But when it comes to this driver, as you can see right here, Intel's Arc A-series graphics products actually get some wild performance boosts. We're talking 11% average FPS boost in Albion Online, 33% Anno 1800, Apex Legends 26%, Assassin's Creed Syndicate 13%, Black Desert Online, Elder Scrolls We Moved Down, Hunt Showdown 27%, Just Cause 3, 160% FPS uplift. This is mostly 1080p, although some of these are at 4K. Just Cause 4 up to 268% average FPS uplift in 1080p with very high settings. Basically, if you own one of Intel's new ARC GPUs, absolutely download and install this. You should see some pretty big performance jumps in quite a few games. And speaking of performance increases, AMD did it. They stuck to their promise and officially released fluid motion frames in the first official driver. Remember, up until now, fluid motion frames was only available on a beta driver, but for the 7600 XT's release, they have made it official on their normal drivers. For those who don't fully understand what fluid motion frames is, just a really quick refresh. Ultimately, fluid motion frames is a driver level frame generation tech from AMD. They only work on AMD GPUs, obviously because they don't make drivers for NVIDIA and couldn't do that. And unfortunately, they are only on the RX 7000 and 6000 series GPUs. But the benefit to this is that they work in nearly every DX12 and DX11 games, meaning you get upwards of basically 100% FPS boost in just about every game you play if you own one of these GPUs. As you can see down here, AMD's Frank Azor says, "It's here. If you haven't tried it yet, you're missing out on huge frame rate gains across thousands of games. AMD Fluid Motion Frames boost FPS up to 97% for a smoother gaming experience by adding frame generation technology to any DirectX 11 and 12 game." So yeah, this is definitely a big deal. Oh, and I actually made a mistake. I said RX 7000 and RX 6000. But that's just on desktop. It also supports their mobile Radeon 700M integrated graphics. Basically, this is kind of just free performance, though with some caveats. Don't forget that fluid motion frames, as well as pretty much any frame generation tech, is going to add a bit of latency. The technology basically takes one frame and then predicts what will happen in the next frame and goes ahead and puts that up, and then it's rendered. The following frame is then rendered. So you have a frame in between two rendered frames that is more or less a fake frame. The reason this adds latency is because if you were to do an input, i.e. move your mouse, move your character forward, something like that during this middle frame, because it's not actually being rendered, it's just predicted from a previous frame, i.e. a frame where you weren't moving the mouse at that moment or you didn't change direction or anything like that. It's not able to see the future. It can predict what's going to show next if you stay the current course. But if you include a new input and then turn your character or anything different than what was happening in the previous frame, it's obviously not going to know, therefore having lag, input lag, until the next frame. So that is why frame generation effectively adds latency. It is one of the negatives. There are ways of helping latency, but it's always going to be a little worse. Regardless, this is still free performance, so I definitely suggest checking it out. And next up, AMD is already gearing up for their next generation APUs. This time, we're hearing some information about Kraken Point. And basically, Kraken Point, think of it as AMD's middle-of-the-road APUs. And we actually got some new information from a known leaker, Everest, who states Kraken Point has 4 Zen 5 cores and 4 Zen 5C cores, meaning AMD is continuing on the road to hybrid core designs. Not only that, but he was asked about whether it would come with RDNA 4, but according to this, it is 3.5 or RDNA 3 plus, whatever you want to call it, and he also claims that it comes with 4 workgroup processors. So, bit of a different from what we've been seeing now, and what's interesting is that WCCF Tech also kind of lines up the other processors that we're expecting from AMD. I thought this was really interesting. First, you can see we have AMD's Strix Point right here. That is set to be their 8050 series. Right now, we have Hawk Point, the 8040 series, but then Strix Points, you can see is Zen 5 plus Zen 5C, 12 core, 24 threads, 32 megabytes of L3 cache. This obviously is all rumors at this point, but then 16 CUs. Very interesting, a bit of a jump from the current 12 CUs that we've been seeing with Hawk Point, then Phoenix. Then we move over to Strix Point Halo. Remember, I've discussed this a few times. That is set to be the creme de la creme APU. This is their Halo Ultimate Edition. And the reason it's such a big deal, 16 cores, 32 threads, then the big one, 40 CUs. So we're talking a massive iGPU in here, set to honestly challenge upwards of mid-tier GPUs. So a really massive boost in integrated GPU performance. Then moving over to Fire Range, that one 16 cores, 32 threads, only 2 CUs, but almost certainly because they expect you to pair it with the discrete GPU, even though once again, this bad boy very much could end up making a ton of discrete GPUs completely obsolete. Then finally, Kraken Points, 8 cores, 16 threads, just like he mentioned up above, RDNA 3 plus, 4nm iGPU, 12 CUs. And all of these, except for Hawk Point, are expected in the second half of 2024, well, possibly this, but then we have Kraken Point is expected in 2025, maybe. And lastly for today, while talking AMD, oh boy, Zen 5 Ryzen 9000, yes, apparently that is going to be what it's called. This story comes from Tech Power Up, but originally comes from a leaker on Twitter called High Yield, who states Zen 5 is closing in. According to him, we could see a launch between April and June of this year, so very soon, and it is apparently set to be called Ryzen 9000. Of course, if you've been following this channel, you know that I more or less speculated that it was likely going to be called Ryzen 9000 anyway, just because AMD kind of already took the 8000 moniker for their mobile chips, and that's still based on Zen 4, really not a big upgrade over 7000 hardly at all. So for them to call Zen 5 Ryzen 8000, I really don't think that would look all that great, so I assume that they would definitely move to Ryzen 9000, and it does at least sound like, according to this, that is the case. Then of course it is still on AM5, that's no surprise at all. Then it's the same on-package chiplet design as Zen 2, 3, 4, that's obviously not a surprise. Same I/O die as Zen 4, not really a big deal of course, same core count. TSMC's in 4, so we're now moving to 4 nanometers. That will obviously help, and according to this, double-digit IPC uplift. Now he does say similar clocks to Zen 4, but with a double-digit IPC uplift, I mean, even if we're talking 15%, but if we're talking something 20-25%, that would be a huge deal, even if the clocks are essentially identical to the current gen parts, just because that IPC uplift would be so big. As you can see right here, it says AMD could dominate until Arrow Lake. But to be honest, depending on just how big of an IPC uplift that is, AMD could potentially even still dominate Arrow Lake. I mean, I obviously don't want to make any final conclusions or anything like that before we end up seeing both of these, obviously, but this could be a really big deal and a massive issue for Intel, especially given the issues that it seems they've had with Meteor Lake, almost looking like they had an IPC regression versus their previous generation, really not boding well, in my opinion, for Intel's future CPU lineups. So we'll obviously have to wait and see, but at least for now, this could be very bad news for Intel. So while that does it for today, are you pumped for AMD's Ryzen 9000 CPUs? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. And as always, have a great day.